Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. I'm really excited today. I know a lot of really good things happened this week. I mentioned last week, but I had a family that I'm working with in Texas and came by and visited and just had a really great visit with them. It really inspired me. But another thing that inspired me is the reason they were coming through was they were on their way to Mercer, partly because they just loved the interview with Dr. Kelly Holloway. They actually went there, got to meet with her. And it just got me excited because I love it when these underrated gems get discovered by our listeners, and then they go and visit and have these amazing visits. And by the way, I encourage you, if you visit any of the schools where you've heard an interview, reach out to the interviewee and tell them that you heard the podcast and you'd love to see if you could chat with them on your visit. The majority of them would absolutely love to be able to spend a few times, especially if it's being student-driven more so than parent-driven. So that really got me excited. And then last night, Lisa and I did something we've never done. We recorded a double spotlight. Of course, we visited High Point on the 3rd and then Elon on the 9th. And so we just decided, let's just bang them both out. And we recorded them. And then we just chit-chatted for about an hour afterward. And I don't know, I'm just blessed to work with just extraordinary people like Lisa. And I just left that conversation, really, really inspired. And then I was editing the interview you're going to hear later today, the last part of the interview with David Marcus, author of the book Acceptance. And he just said a lot of really profound things. So I can't wait for you guys to hear part 3 of David's interview and Acceptance. It's a lot of things. We get off the topic of the book and just talk about just life and college in general. And he just says some really, really, really profound things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I've wanted our listeners to hear, more about. And so I can't wait for you guys to hear that part. But a little bit of an audible today. So I was planning on going over changes to the FAFSA, which are significant, but I'm going to push that back a week because a listener sent in a question, which was a follow-up about last week's discussion about early programs, Emily from North Carolina. And I just thought it would make more sense for me to address that question just after I had finished talking about early programs. And as I got into preparing, I realized, this is going to be a little bit longer than I thought. So originally I thought maybe I would do both today, but I'll just push the FAFSA conversation off so I can go into a little bit more depth in the follow-up question about early programs. But before we get into that, I want to play a Speakpipe question that came in from a listener in Jersey and make a quick comment.
Hey, Mark. My name is Alex from New Jersey. I'm a regular listener, and I couldn't help noticing that it's time for you to re-record your podcast intro. Congrats on your daughter's graduation from NC State, and keep up the great work.
So thank you, Alex, for that. Thanks you for that shout out to my daughter. And I love our listeners. They're awesome. I love hearing your voices. I want to just give you guys a quick update. So Joy has decided that she loves to work in higher ed. So she'll continue to work in mental health counseling in higher ed. She really loves case management. And one of the things that's great about the research triangle, I don't think I'll ever be able to pry her away from there. But fortunately, I love it there as well. So great place to visit. But I love the colleges that are there. And so she's pretty far along in the interview process with all of your 3 leading schools there, Duke. She's really pretty far along with Duke. That's looking the most promising. She was a grad assistant there last year, and they've got several opportunities they expect will open in July. And there's somebody there that wants to create a position for her if that doesn't happen. So that's probably where she'll work, but there's an opportunity at NC State that she's probably going to be up against some really stiff competition because of the level of the job, but she thought she had a good first interview there. And then something just recently opened up at Chapel Hill. So she's in the process of interviewing in all three of these. And you'll know when she gets the job because I'll change the introduction. Then you'll know. All right. Okay, so next you're going to hear another Speakpipe question. And that'll transition into our content for the day.
Emily from North Carolina. I'm a parent of a rising senior, and I just listened to your episode about why colleges love early action. And one thing I didn't hear you mention that my daughter has found about specifically Stanford having restricted early action, where if you apply to them, you can't apply to any other private schools, which we found very interesting. And I'm wondering if more schools are going to go to that. So thanks so much for all you do. We've really enjoyed listening. Thanks.
Okay, so Emily, she mentioned Stanford, in the question, but I wanted to take a step back. I really didn't get into last week talking about the benefits to colleges of early programs. I really didn't cover this niche of restrictive early action programs or single choice early action programs. And I'll get into that in a second for a few reasons. One, I'm always feel a little queasy sometimes about talking about the elite of the elite because I don't want to reinforce that. There's so much buzz in New York Times and everything because it gets clicks if you write about these elite schools. But at the same time, I know people have questions and I want to answer them. So I want to talk to you today about 7 different schools that have restrictive programs, how their programs are different. And there's a number of takeaways that you can glean from this conversation. One of them is how important it is that you really read the websites of these schools. You have to read the websites because there are these fine line little differences that you generally will only really find out in the website. So let's talk about, first of all, let's break them into 2 categories. So you have, I used to say 4 schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford, but Caltech joined that list of schools that have one type of restrictive early action program, oftentimes referred to as single choice early action. And what I want you to see here, I actually pulled things specifically from their website, how they represent it differently, but it is the same concept. Just has different twists to it. And the concept is this, that if you're going to apply early to one of those 5 schools, then you cannot apply early action to another private school. That's the basic core of it. Now, before I get into the 5 different schools and how their wording is different, why would they have this policy? Let's talk about that first. Well, what they would say is we're allowing a student to have an extra 6 months to decide because as an early action program, early deadline, early notification, but you still have until May 1st to decide. So they would argue that a lot of students may not be ready to make a binding commitment in November 1, or they deserve the right to be able to compare finances before they make the decision or to visit all their schools to really, truly figure out what school is best for them. And it's not fair for us to ask students to make a commitment binding in October without seeing money, without visiting colleges, oftentimes before they're ready. That's not fair to them. That would be their argument. Now, what they won't always emphasize this other side, but that's why you listen to your college-bound kid. The other side is, well, it's also not fair to us to not have some sense of whether or not we're a first choice school or to decrease our yield by having them apply to a lot of other competitor early programs. So in other words, in exchange for us giving them that more latitude compared to the binding early decision programs, they need to give us something as well, which is limit the competition that we're competing against. And if we can do that, then this can work. So the first thing I want to say is it shows how important demonstrated interest is. These are the biggest brand names in the world, certainly in this country. The biggest brand names in this country and many in the world. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Caltech. By the way, Caltech literally just implemented this policy, last year for the first time. What happened to just counting on the power of your brand and letting people pick and choose? Well, guess what? They know their yield's going to go down significantly in some cases if they don't at least get some indications, are we in first place going in? But what's interesting is the different wording that they use on their website, which I'm going to share with you. Then we're going to get into a second type of restrictive early action program that literally only Georgetown and Notre Dame have, which is far, far, far less restrictive. And quite honestly, I don't have any problem with the restrictions that Notre Dame and Georgetown have in their version. I have a lot of problems with this plan, and no college counselor that I know likes this single choice early action. Why do we not like it? Because these schools have such low admit rates, but they've now made it harder for you to get in other schools that you might be interested in, because as we've talked about, there are a lot of schools that will have a higher admit rate in early action than they will in regular. So they're forcing you to go into the more competitive pool. So they turn around and don't admit you. And now there's lots of schools that you could have maybe got in and now you won't. Case in point, I'll just mention two. Tulane and Chicago both have regular decision admit rates of under 1%. Under 1%. Colorado College around 3%. So now you can't apply early action to those schools. You have to go into this mega competitive pool. And they hold all the cards and rarely admit. And on top of it, there's some smugness and sanctimoniousness that they often have too. Like, we're not like these other schools putting you in a binding agreement 6 months ahead of time without letting you compare aid awards. We don't think that's fair. There are a lot of us out here in a lot of ways would rather somebody apply early decision and be able to have a whole bunch of other early action schools they can compare, they can apply to. In some ways, this is worse. Not always, but in some ways it's worse. But anyway, not a fan of single choice early action. Of course, when a kid gets in, it can be good. When they get in, then it can work favorably because they do have that extra 6 months. They can take more time. They can compare money if money's an issue. But the problem is most of these schools still have admit rates in single choice early action that is in the single digits. So it's just the majority of people it doesn't serve well. All right, now let's talk about the details, the fine print. And by the way, some of them have admit rates in the teens, but that's really not that much better. I mean, if a school has an admit rate of 12, 13, 14% in their single choice early action program, that's 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 7 still of extraordinary kids that are, it's a disservice because now it's hurt them with other schools that they might have applied to in early action. All right, let's just look at the language. So Harvard, if you're applying to Harvard under restrictive early action, you may not apply to any other private institution under early decision, early action, or restrictive early action plan, or to a binding early program at a public university. So those are the restrictions, right? Can't apply ED anywhere. You can't apply to early action or restrictive early action, or a place like UVA that's got, it's public, but it's got ED. Vermont, public, it's got ED. Virginia Tech, William & Mary, you get it. Public, but they've got ED. You can't apply to them either. That's all they really say. They don't have as much details. Now, I will give credit to Yale because they have the most details of any of these schools on their website. It's clear because they clearly elucidate the exceptions. One of the interesting things, and this is one of the things that's why this process is confusing. It's only 5 schools, but they can't settle on the same language. So Harvard calls it REA, restrictive early action. It's the only term they use to refer to it, restrictive early action. Yale calls it single choice early action, which, by the way, I prefer because when we look at Georgetown and Notre Dame, they have some restrictions. So it would be a lot easier if that term restrictive early action was reserved for Notre Dame Georgetown, even though I think the restrictions are reasonable. We'll get to that in a second. And single choice early action was reserved for these 5 schools that say we are the only school you can apply early action to. But unfortunately, we don't get to control what they do. So here's what Yale says. Yale's early action plan is unlike many other programs, and that if you apply for single choice early action, you may not simultaneously apply for early action or early decision to any other school with few exceptions. See below. Here's what the exceptions are. You may apply to any college's non-binding rolling admissions program. Second, you may apply to any public institution at any time, provided that admission is non-binding. So you can apply to non-binding public schools. That's an exception. 3, you may apply to another college's early decision 2 program, but only if the notification of admission occurs after January 1. In other words, you actually can apply to a binding ED2 program after you've already found out about your Yale offer. So there's some flexibility there. If you are admitted through another college's early decision 2 binding program, you must withdraw your application. So they are literally letting you apply to ED2 programs as long as it's after Yale. And why would they do that? Well, I can tell you, because this comes directly from a conversation I had with a senior level Yale person in their office. They said, Mark, we have a 92% yield rate for people we accept in single choice early action. So basically what they're saying is, once you get in Yale, we're so confident that you're going to be so enthusiastic about Yale that we'll even let you apply to another early decision 2 program, knowing that almost nobody else is going to do that. Because most of the early decision 2 schools, most people wouldn't pick over Yale, just to be honest. So I do appreciate their generosity in that offer, but you've missed out on all the early actions that could be appealing. You may apply to another college's early action 2 program. Guess what? Very, very, very few schools have early action 2. So that's really not much of an offer. And then you may apply to any institution outside of the United States at any time. Okay, you're allowed to go to internationals. Now let's look at Princeton. If you apply, and they call it single choice early action like Yale does, which I do appreciate, I think that's a better name, you may not apply to an early program at any other private school or university within the United States. So that's what Princeton says. Okay, now let's look at what Stanford says, because Stanford is a lot like Yale in that they are quite detailed in what they say in their description. So what does Stanford say? Really interesting language. Restrictive early action at Stanford is non-binding. Okay, we know that. Now look at this. This is in bold print. Restrictive early action may be a good option for you. Now this, just don't miss this. This isn't bold, by the way. If all, not some, if all of the following apply. You know what the first one they say? You have identified Stanford as your first choice. In other words, you should not apply to us restrictive early action unless we are your first choice. If we're not your first choice, don't bother applying. See the built-in demonstrated interest? We want to read. We want to know we're leading the race. We'll take our chance on yield and not lock you in as long as you let us know that right now we're in first place. This is why I tell you, interest is wrapped up in so many schools, even the biggest of the brand names. 2, you have taken a challenging academic schedule through grade 11 and have done well. When we review your application, it's important you have a strong transcript through 11th because we will not see your senior year grades. I think that's great advice. 3, you have enough time before November 1 deadline to write a thoughtful application. And that's a lot of Stanford because that application is a bear. And then Stanford does something that I really do appreciate. And a lot of schools don't do this. This is what it says. Stanford's philosophy is to make final decisions whenever possible. As a result, Stanford defers only a very small percentage of restrictive early action applications to regular decision. So I don't like that Stanford calls it restrictive early action. I really wish we could just all settle on single choice for these 5 schools. But I appreciate the fact that we're not going to string you on forever. We're usually going to either admit you or we're not. Now, that used to be pretty much ironclad. But now they have few exceptions there. A small percentage of people, they will defer. But that's nice to know. I like that. Because the schools that defer a lot, then it just strings interest on forever, and then they still don't admit you in the spring, and you could have, fallen in love with other schools. Okay, Stanford goes on to say, Stanford's policy that you simultaneously apply to Stanford with a decision plan or early restrictive action requires the following. Okay, these are the exceptions. Any public university with non-binding early action program, similar to what we've said before. Any college university with non-binding early admissions, similar to what we said before. Any foreign college university, similar to what we said before. Here they add any military academy. Other schools don't say that, but they say any military academy. Get the point? You got to read the fine print. You can't just assume, okay, this school's single choice early action. I got it. I've looked at this one school's policy. Got it. I've got this thing down. No, go to the website, read the fine print. And then they go on to say, any college or university with an early deadline for a scholarship or a special program. So they'll allow you to make an exception to apply to another school so you don't meet their scholarship deadline. You didn't see that in Yale. You didn't see that in Harvard. You didn't see that in Princeton. That's why you got to read the fine print. So really, really, really interesting. And then they go on to say something else because they know it's complicated. So the only school that says this, if after reviewing the exceptions above, you are still uncertain about whether you can simultaneously apply to Stanford's restrictive early action program and another college, please email admission@stanford.edu for clarification. In your email, include the page link to the early application plan you are considering. Copy and paste the website description and the requirements. You see how serious they are? We want to know where first, to the point where send us if you're not clear and we'll resolve this dispute. Fascinating. They're the only ones that say that. And then Caltech, once again, they use the term restrictive early action, and they also say the same language that Stanford uses about we expect that we're number one if you're applying restrictive early action to us. That's a built-in expectation that we have. I'll read a little bit of this to you. Restrictive early action is non-binding for students. Look at this. Check this word. Check this word, confident. Who are confident that Caltech is their first choice university. Excited about the possibility of attending Caltech. I mean, this is really, really over the top. And want to learn if they're admitted to Caltech. At the same time, students will not be required to accept a Caltech REA offer and may compare financial aid options if they choose to apply during the regular decision process. Then it goes on and on to have very similar exceptions to Stanford, including the military one is listed. The scholarship program, one I mentioned before for Stanford, is also listed. And they do allow the early decision 2 option that I referred to earlier as well. And then you need to withdraw early decision 2. And that I do think it's generous that they allow the ED2 option, because that does bring 115 schools in, but that have early decision 2. But once again, you're losing out on a lot of early action options. And they're working off the assumption of, if we deny you, who cares if you ED2? If we defer you, we're probably not taking you anyway. And if we admit you, our brand name is stronger than any ED2 option, so you're probably coming to us. So it's fascinating. All right, enough about those. Now I want to talk about the other 2, Georgetown and Notre Dame. I like these. I could see myself, if I'm a VP of enrollment, if I'm in charge of admission office, and say, hey, what do you guys think about going to restrictive early action the way Georgetown does, the way Notre Dame does? I'm like, you know what? I like it. But one thing that's to take note, every other school I've mentioned so far, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, and Caltech, they all refer to their program as restrictive early action or single choice early action. And sometimes they even interchange the terms when they're in their description. Georgetown just calls it early action. I don't like that. It's still restrictive. So Georgetown's early action program is grounded in the belief that students should be free to choose among colleges until May 1st, candidate reply day. Accordingly, admitted EA students will have the same reply date as regular decision deadlines. In keeping with this principle, Students applying under the early action program, now check this out, may not apply to any binding ED program. Now they give the reason why. Since they would be not free to choose Georgetown if admitted. When I put myself back in my admissions space, if I'm going to read a file, I want to know someone has a chance to come. I think that's fair. They're basically saying, don't apply early to us, and there's no possible way you can come here because you're applying ED1 binding to an ED1 school. I think it's fair, and I really do. Because you are freed up, check this out, this is important. Students are, however, allowed to apply to other early action. Let me repeat that. Students are, however, allowed to apply to other early action or regular decision programs while simultaneously applying to Georgetown. I think that's fair. Now, I'm going to give Notre Dame even higher grades because they at least call theirs restrictive early action. That's what it is. The restrictive early action November 1 deadline. Notre Dame has non-binding restrictive early action. It's the exact same thing as Stanford. They're just giving it the right name. They basically say a student applying restrictive early action may apply to other early action programs at private or public. A student applying restrictive early action to Notre Dame may not apply to any college, public, or private in their binding ED1 program. Once again, you need to be free to be able to come here if you're going to apply. Can't apply, and we don't even have a chance. We're just backups from the start. If you apply to Notre Dame through REA, you may apply to any ED2 program. So they do allow ED2 like some of the other schools do. Once again, as this has a deadline post our REA decision release in mid-December. So this is the same thing. Like if we deny you, we don't care. If we defer you, we're probably not taking you anyway. And go ahead and take advantage of an ED program somewhere else. And if we admit you, we have confidence. You're going to get excited. You're going to get the garb. You're going to get the swag. You're going to get all of that. And you're going to get into our online communities. And you're probably not going to even be attracted to even apply to another school after that because of your enthusiasm. So I think it's fair. Now, they do have some other language here that's interesting. I want to read this to you. If you are applying to another school's single choice admission plan, please reach out to that institution regarding restrictions. Now, that surprises me a little bit, that language, because you really can apply to another school's single choice restriction plan without violating their policy. So I actually like the language MIT uses. You said, MIT, where'd they come from? You haven't mentioned them. Well, MIT has unrestricted early action, similar to public schools. You can apply to as many early action schools as you want. However, there is some language on MIT's website, which I think is smart. It says, while we impose no restrictions on you, it would be unethical for you to apply to our unrestricted plan and also apply to another school's restrictive plan. We expect your integrity to abide by their rules as well. So it's kind of smart because MIT gets all the benefits of not locking you in, not restricting you. But at the same time, who are some of their biggest competitors? Caltech, Stanford, Harvard. So they're biggest competitors. And they're saying you really can't apply single choice to them because you'd be violating their policies and therefore operating unethically. Pretty brilliant because they get all the upside of the PR of not restricting you, but there still actually end up being some restrictions and they're fair. You should be expected to act ethically. So obviously, I love MIT's program the most, but I don't expect other people to do that because I know how competitive it is out there, and I understand this need for schools to lock kids in order to please their stakeholders. And let me say that when I talked about the biggest benefits of early decision or even these restricted, unrestricted early action programs, I think the first thing people go to, they think, well, the benefit is if you have to accept one to get one, as opposed to 5 to get 1, 4 to get 1, 6 to get 1, you reduced workload. That is a benefit. I think the first thing people think of is another thing I think that people think of right away is, well, all you're trying to do is drive your admit rate down because obviously more people apply in the regular round. They're applying for less spots. Now you have a lower admit rate. Certainly schools are very cognizant of that benefit. I actually believe the single biggest reason, though, why schools like these plans is that they help ensure that you please multiple stakeholders and give yourself the best chance of a balanced class. And I really do believe that. And to me, that's completely understandable. And I'd be hypocritical if I didn't do it, because when I did boarding school admissions, it was a big deal if someone was willing to commit versus if they weren't. We almost always would take an admissible applicant that was willing to commit over someone that wasn't. We took chances on high flyers that we knew were applying to the most competitive schools in the country. We probably weren't going to get them, but they were so extraordinary, we would put it out there. But that kid was significantly better than the other student they were competing with. If it was two school students and they were relatively the same in our rating scale, we used a 1 through 9 rating scale. And if they came in similar ratings, we were going to go with the one who's going to commit, and understandably so. It helped ensure a balanced class. That was the single biggest reason why we did it. We have a chance to please multiple stakeholders, and it's like putting the frame of the puzzle together. And I think that's the single biggest reason why colleges like the program as well. So hopefully this was helpful. I know I went into some detail. It was pretty lengthy, but I'm a chatterbox. I can't help it.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I've told you that the Davis Marcus interview is fantastic. Let me just tell you a little bit more about it. David talks about his own son and why he never went to college and how it worked out for him. He talks about the value of community college. He talks about the value of diversity. He makes a passionate plea to parents that we all need to listen to and heed. And then he goes on the hot seat for our lightning round. Listen and enjoy. But I know, Dave, you had some things to say about community college. Why don't you share that? Because it's really important. It doesn't get enough love.
Good. So that actually leads to my third point, which is going to sound like I will sound like I contradicted everything I just talked about since I started this podcast with you. The third thing is you don't need to go to college. You don't need to go to 4-year college. There are many successful people right now who are doing certifications, who are doing alternate programs, who are doing apprenticeships. And I'll talk about community college in a second. But, you know, here I am. I live and breathe college stuff. I've been to scores of campuses. I love visiting schools. And yet my son, my oldest son, did not go to college. It just wasn't for him. He did high school, and he just doesn't want to spend, he told me he doesn't want to spend his life in an office. He doesn't want to spend 4 years in a classroom. And so he is successful, and we should talk about our definition in this country of success. He has a business where he's a dog handler. He has clients, and he takes their dogs to shows. He shows the dogs. He cares for dogs. He knows every medicine those dogs need. He has to deal with clients who can be a little bit irascible, a little bit demanding because they have dogs that are very expensive. And he has a real gift for it, and it is fun. He travels the country, and he sometimes flies dogs on a plane from one place to another, sometimes drives them. And he has this immense respect. When I watch him working, it's incredible. He's like, I don't want to say it's like a cult leader because that has all kinds of connotations. But he's got these people sort of just, he knows, he has this vast knowledge of dozens of dog breeds and dozens of individual dogs and how they're related and what their meds are and stuff. And it's just a pleasure watching him. And college was not for him. And I've worked with students where I said to parents and the kids candidly, you know what? Let's think about a gap year. Let's think about an alternative. Let's think about an internship, because I think you don't want to go on to more time in classes after being exhausted or enervated or annoyed by high school. And so the other option is often community college, where you can try different things. You can see what you like. You have less pressure sometimes than a 4-year school. And then you can take that, and you've talked about this many times. There's a pipeline increasingly that's clear these days from community college to, if you want, to a 4-year college. But there are also a lot of associate's degrees that are valid, good degrees. And so I think we've made this a certain part of this country has made this sort of college obsessed thing just wrong. In other places, in Israel, in Australia, and around Europe, it's routine to take a gap year, to travel, to work, to volunteer, to do something that's different. And why have we decided that at age 18 and a half, you should be embarking on the next 4 years of your education and then maybe thinking about a grad degree? Maybe it's time to just, as a nation, say, We should have public service, community service. You go serve in the military or a civilian conservation corps or teach or whatever it is for a year. You give back. We taxpayers have paid for your education or at least some form of your survival. Maybe you give back for a year. I would love that. If I were the czar of whatever in this country, that I would enact that immediately. Sorry, folks.
Yeah, and there's a lot I don't like about the sort of anti-college movement that's grown a lot, especially in the last 10 years on the right, but particularly on the right. But one thing that I do like is it's time that we do challenge this one size fits all. And there's never been more opportunities now with badges and certificates and online options and all kinds of corporate training programs and even positions that once used to require degrees that no longer require degrees. Not to mention, crafts and trades and working with your hands and so many different things out there. And we really need to celebrate that message that you shared, David, that the concept of fit not only applies to picking the right college, it applies to even whether four-year college right out of high school is the path everybody needs to embark on.
Yes, and I agree with you. I strongly agree with you. I don't like it when it becomes a sort of anti-intellectual, anti-whatever
Right.
thing. Look, colleges are not perfect places, and but one of the things that after visiting huge state schools and tiny, tiny private schools, one of the things I love is that just the way the military mixes people of different backgrounds, there are a lot of colleges that are making sincere effort. Well, now, I mean, we're going to see what happens when the Supreme Court gets rid of affirmative action. They want people from different backgrounds and different viewpoints and different things to mix. And at age 18 or 22 or 23 or 24, that's a great thing to have people to have people argue with you and in a civil way and try to disabuse you of what you've grown up with, and you can become firmer in your beliefs, but maybe you'll be open to new ideas. And this whole thing about campuses are woke and so forth, I don't agree with everything that happens on campuses, but I've been amazed by, and some of the camps I've been, the real legitimate discussions and arguments and late night debates that happen. It's so refreshing in this society where we have so many gaps and so many divides and so many things we can't talk about. To have a place where young people, not always young people, but younger people sometimes, can actually learn from each other and learn from professors and learn from books of all things.
No, thank you so much for that. So this has been great, David. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fun for me, hopefully enjoyable for our listeners. We're about to transition to our lightning round. Before we do, is there anything about any topic that you haven't shared yet that's on your heart you want to share?
I guess there's a message to parents as well as kids, but we have to, those of us who do have aspirations for our kids, who do have dreams for our kids, who do see it through the lens of college, we just have to tone it down a little bit. I was in a high school, which happens to be very near to me, where I heard about a mom who lobbied for her daughter to get it, not, to get an A+, lobby with the principal, because this mom was determined to get this daughter into, a top STEM engineering program. And come on, look, if a teacher makes a mistake, a student should address it, even occasionally a parent. But to go to the principal and say, essentially, my kid needs to get into college, you got to change this grade. This is just a crazy arms race. Slow it down a little bit, and don't, the pressure we put on these kids. I have worked with these wonderful young men and women, and then when we talk about their essays, when we talk about what's in their hearts, I hear about eating disorders. I hear about kids who don't sleep. I hear about kids who don't take a lunch period any day at all. I hear about kids who are obsessed with college from ninth grade. We've got to tone it down a bit. We've got to make sure that we're educating the whole kid, that we're thinking about the whole individual, that we're raising critical thinkers and involved, active students and kids who actually care about each other and their parents and their communities, because that's what we need and that's what we lack right now.
Thank you. All right, transitioning to the lightning round. So you've been on, I think, over 180 campuses. Name a couple that stand out to you for their beauty.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, look, I think you guys have mentioned Stanford and Pepperdine and places like that. So I'm not allowed to say that. I think Tulane has a kind of New Orleans-y beauty, and there's so
Mm-hmm.
many. I think they're architectural gems. I love colleges,
Sure.
and Mount Holyoke is amazing, and Wellesley is amazing in Massachusetts, and I would say I would not say Harvard. Sorry, Harvard. I do not put that anywhere near that. But I have a secret dream I can tell you because my kids don't listen to my podcast. I think Davidson is really cool, and because my son, who's a teenager, who's an eighth grader, has a sweatshirt that says David's son. I dream of him going. I love that little town. I love that school. I love the sports there. So Davidson is like my little secret place.
I don't know if you know this, but my daughter's a graduate, my oldest, and
Oh, you always mention that. I forgot about that. So I'm addicted. I'm like, yeah, we could talk about that. Carol Quillen, who was the president, was such an amazing person, and
yeah, Carol Quinn was awesome.
I could talk about my favorite presidents. But I all across the country, I've seen these amazing campuses, and I wish I could spend a year at each one of them.
Well, Karis, my oldest daughter, loves Davidson so much she's living there now. She's that literally became her home past college. So we can't pry her back to Georgia. She fell in love with that whole area, Cornelius and Davidson and all that. So no, it's really a hard question because there's just spectacular campuses out there, and they're just beautiful, and beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But you teed it up, so I want to ask it. What name a president or someone that's impressed you in your time, either as a reporter or some of your educational research you've done,
Okay, so actually,
besides
that was
Carol
actually
Quillen, because you've already mentioned Carol Quillen
yes.
from
Well,
Davidson.
she
Yeah,
was amazing. I think she was there for 11 years. She just moved
yeah.
out. But all right, so I'm actually going to tell you this is actually related to a tip of mine to families. A lot of times, a college with a really dynamic president, it trickles down. I hate the word trickle down. Sorry, it affects everybody. It energizes everybody. So I would tell you that Ronald Crutcher was at University of Richmond and did an amazing job. I think he was the first black president they
He
had, and
was. Yeah.
he really imbued that place with energy. And Mark Gearan has come back to Hobart William Smith after he was there for years. And he was the head of the Peace Corps. He was very active in Washington before, and he brings in all these amazing speakers to upstate New York, to Hobart William Smith. And finally, Ruth Simmons was the president of Smith College and did incredible fundraising and energizing a women's college in Massachusetts, and then went to my alma mater, Brown, and gave it all kinds of great things and made them talk about the legacy of slavery. She was the first she was actually the first woman president of Brown, I think, and the first black president of Brown. And I think a great president makes a great difference.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's talk about this. Favorite television show? Let's go more lighthearted.
Okay, well, I'm not going to tell you any of the documentaries based on college admissions scandals, although I'm of course addicted to those. I got to
Sure.
tell you that I'm really interested in family dynamics and family stuff, and so of course I'm going to tell you I think Succession is it's unbelievably riveting, and it's like the Murdoch family come alive and great acting, and I can't wait for the next season of it. I did not watch. I lived overseas for years, did not watch TV, and now I'm like, there's certain things like that I can't stop thinking about.
All right, let's talk about overseas. Favorite country that you have visited?
Wow. Well, I've been to 58 countries, I think. So,
Wow.
and besides the United States, I lived in three, as I said. So that's a tough one. I think that this is not going to be your average guest will not say this, but I think Bolivia is a beautiful, beautiful country. And I went out with the Bolivian Navy, which they've been really angry for 100+ years. They lost their ocean front to Peru. So the Bolivian Navy, they took me out and they patrol Lake Titicaca. Like they're waiting for Peru to give up the sea line, the coast, and they'll go back to patrolling the Pacific Ocean. But for now, they go up and down Lake Titicaca. And they have the Chapare rainforest, which is beautiful. And then they have La Paz, which is a mile high where I couldn't breathe. I ran out of oxygen there. I mean, there's so many places. I lived in Brazil, and Brazil has so many amazing kind of regions. So Latin America is very near and dear to me. But I've also been to Rwanda, which is coming back after a terrible time, in Kenya, which I thought was fascinating. South Africa, Cape Town. I'm a travel addict, and I've been sidelined by COVID. So I've been a cantankerous, miserable person for 3 years.
Well, one of our co-hosts in our rotation, Sylvia Burgos, she's a travel addict as well, and you've actually got her beat. She's up to 47 countries, so 58, that's pretty impressive. Dave's going to exercise. What's your preferred method?
Well, funny, I'm rewarding myself at this podcast because it's actually warm on this mid-February day. I just go out on my bike and I just forget about everything and I just go cycling around. It's just suburban neighborhoods. I'm not, some super cyclist, but I find it so relaxing. And the summertime, there's a town pool here where when I go in that water too, it's like that's the most liberating thing for me. Just all the stresses just ease away.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Name a book other than your own that you'd recommend parents read.
Wow, that's a tough one. There's an amazing book which goes with the ethos of a lot of your guests, which is called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee, and it just looks at the fact that a lot of us tend to sort of want to protect our kids and nurture our kids and help our kids and cocoon our kids, but it's okay to have them endure failure. It's okay to have them endure hard times. It's okay to have them do setbacks, and frankly, I tell parents that often when I'm talking about the college admissions process. There are going to be some rough and tumble times. There are going to be some disappointments, perhaps, but that's what makes kids stronger. And it's okay to have a skinned knee or two skinned knees.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's Susan Tree's favorite book, too, is one of our co-hosts. So that's 2 endorsements there for that book. Share your advice for a parent listening. That's most of our audience. If you want, you could give advice to a student as well, or a college counselor, because that's all 3 of those are audiences that we have. But I'll let you pick your choice, any or all, parent, student, college counselor.
Okay, so I will say, at least for the parent and the student, look, I know that if you kind of go on TikTok or you look for tips online about how to get in college, they're going to tell you, get these great apprenticeships and research opportunities. And those are amazing. And I know, especially if you're going to STEM, the value of those. But I've worked with a lot of kids who had just a dreary job at a country club or a fast food place for a summer or a couple of summers, or just even an unglamorous job at a day camp, setting up art tables and dealing with kids who had skinned knees and so forth. And there is really a value in our society, especially for upper middle class kids, of having just a regular job where you have to show up on time and you have to be a good sport and all that stuff. So, well, it's great to have all those prestigious internships, and I get it. Just a regular job where you show up is good. I mean, that's something we could talk about society. I think we should have more jobs available for teenagers, and even maybe a lower wage if it's a small business. But that's a larger thing that I hope to address someday. But there's something really embracing about that. And then the other thing I want to say to the kids, I always say to is, what I find, I love dealing with kids and parents, but I really find a distinct lack of curiosity a lot of times. They're so wound up in the process of getting through high school or getting into college or getting out of college. What about curiosity? What about asking good questions? What about being challenged? What about not knowing everything? What about being surprised and having the serendipitous high school course or community college course during high school on weekends, or a Khan Academy course for free, where you're just learning about something totally different, or you're reading something that is not from your culture, from your background, from your beliefs. Curiosity is sorely lacking. And when you talk to college instructors, they'll tell you the same thing.
This has been really awesome, David. I really appreciate you spending an hour with us. If you could close by letting people know how they can get your book if they're interested in checking it out and reading it.
Sure. I will not promote my Twitter handle because I am a little bit disenchanted, very disenchanted with some of the stuff that's going on Twitter right now. And that really, I'm looking for some better forum, or I'm looking for some change at Twitter. But
you and me both.
the easiest thing is my name. Not my full name is David L. Marcus, but davemarcus.com is my site. And I've got contact information and book information and how to get in touch with me if you're a Russian spam bot and ruin my email. DaveMarcus.com. And I love hearing from readers. I still hear from students who say, I like the character so-and-so, or I really like this attitude about it's a fit. It's about the fit, not the brand. So DaveMarcus.com is the best way. And I I have not been traveling and speaking at schools, but I used to do that. And now that I feel like the pandemic is abating or easing a little bit, I'm going to get back on the road because I love sharing the messages that you share. I love sharing them with high school audiences and churches and synagogues and youth centers and parents as much as kids. It's just I love the discussions we have and the challenges I get too.
Thank you so much for that. And thanks for reaching out to me. And keep doing what you're doing. You're doing really good work in the trenches. And I really feel simpatico with your messaging. And it's really been great having you on here today, David.
And Mark, can I just make one last comment?
Sure.
You talk about your daughters, and I love hearing that. And so I'll just tell you that the other thing that's going to be redeeming or interesting or I hope uplifting for parents is my daughter went to University of Richmond. I mentioned how I love that place. I think it's a beautiful campus, but she, for whatever reason, being a Northern kid, whatever, she decided to transfer to Northeastern University, which has a totally different kind of campus, or I would say no campus. She thrived there. She went to Israel. She went to Amman, Jordan. She went to Germany. She spent a semester, even in COVID, in Thailand. And she graduated with a degree in criminal justice and psychology, and she's thriving. So if you don't end up at the perfect, ideal, wonderful college, there is life.
I'm really glad you ended with that. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the transfer pathway is the best route. And that's let's end on that. That was great. Thanks, David.
I really appreciate it. Best to your audience. Thanks.
My pleasure. On Thursday's episode, Susan is my co-pilot. And we're looking at an article appeared at Inside Higher Ed by Eric Hoover entitled, "Is it the end of student recruitment as we know it?" A question from a listener sent in on Speakpipe is from a student, and we get excited when students send questions in. It asks about BSMD programs. Our interview is our final part with Gus Resendes looking at the pros and cons of co-op education. And our spotlight will be Lisa talking about her college counselor trip she took with a handful of counselors to Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, part 1 of 2. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.